Good morning. As Aaron mentioned, my name is Zach Zuckerman. I've been managing the Flats Ecology program out of the Great Eleuthera Institute for about 4 years now. And this is kind of a cool opportunity for me to present really about almost 8 years of research that's been going on in the Bahamas, and we're finally getting around to really getting a good idea of what these bonefish are doing, at least around Eleuthera. So bonefish are a culturally and economically and ecologically valuable fishery. In terms of culture, the bonefish adorns the Bahamian dime. Guiding is sometimes an operation that's passed on from grandfather to son to grandson, and it stays in the family. But on an economical level, it's a really important fishery, bringing over $141 million to the Bahamas. And this is important, especially for the family islands, where somewhere like Eleuthera or Andros, where Eleuthera, 12% of our tourism-derived income comes from bone fishing, and Andros, up to 80% of their tourism-derived income comes from bone fishing. That's pretty substantial. Anglers stay longer in the Bahamas than the regular vacationer, and they spend more money. So it really adds a lot of value to the family islands. Because of this economical value, the flats fishery has kind of come under spotlight for a bunch of organizations really wanting to kind of have better management, have a better understanding of what's happening in the fishery. And this includes guides associations, NGOs such as the BNT and CEI, individual anglers. And what this really shows is that people are recognizing the importance of the fishery, and we want to be able to manage the fishery best. But a lot of this proposed legislation is kind of focusing on managing anglers. But we need to take a much larger consideration than just looking at anglers in management, okay? And Liz kind of touched on this, and Justin will touch on this in a little bit, but bonefish have an interesting life history pattern where they inhabit mostly the flats. Here's Abaco, here's Eleuthera, here's Andros. We see bonefish inhabiting the shallow water flat systems, but making relatively large migrations out of the flat systems to deeper water habitat to spawn. So that means they're covering a lot of ground and can run into a lot of different threats throughout their life history. As they travel through these habitats and their home habitats, which are primarily shallow water creeks, you'll see coastal development, dredging, backfilling, mangrove loss, and a lot of other threats to bonefish. And even political boundaries don't necessarily mandate where bonefish are, as Liz kind of mentioned. When the leptocephali are at large in the sea, regional currents can really play a huge role in redistributing where they go. So we really need a holistic management approach to managing bonefish. And the challenge here is, how can we best manage the fishery without solid baseline data? And that's kind of where the Bahamas initiative comes in, started about 2008. This was a collaboration between the Fisheries Conservation Foundation, the Bonefish and Tarpon Trust, CEI, and the BNT to really get a comprehensive understanding of bonefish habitat use, movements, etc. The main objectives were to determine population health and economic value of the fishery, and also, and very importantly, is to engage guides and anglers in management and in science to really give ownership of the fishery to the folks who rely on the fishery. So the Great Eleuthera Institute is situated right here at the southern point of Eleuthera. Just for reference, this is Rock Sound. Rock Sound Airport is right up here. And we're in a unique place where we can easily access lots of different habitats through different educational and outreach programs where we include students, sometimes up to 500 students a year actually participate in field work. A lot of that work is actually looking at bonefish, getting out in the field and deploying conventional tags to look at movements and growth. And we also engage guides to participate in this research. And we can easily frequent more than 14 different habitats in South Eleuthera. And it's important that we hit all these bonefish habitats, which are kind of a mixture of creeks and flats. And I'll tell you why it's important that we hit all these habitats shortly. But we really focus on kind of this rock sound bank system. It's a shallow water Great Bahama Bank here, and we have over 5 square kilometers of bonefish creeks and flats 7 distinct systems and almost 40 kilometers of shoreline that bonefish use as migratory pathways and can also feed as they go. Since 2009, we've been performing a concentrated mark recapture study that involves seining or angling and deploying individually numbered tags in fish. So the tags, we use soft netted seines. The tags are just implanted in the dorsal musculature here, and if the fish is recaptured in the future, whether by us or another angler, there's information to report that tag capture. Now, since the study initiated in 2009, and this is a 5-year study set right here, we've tagged and released over 1,400 bonefish, of which we've had 25% of the bonefish that we captured are recaptured. So we have a very high recapture rate, which gives us a rare, comprehensive understanding of movements, growth, and population measurements for this Rock Sound Banks area. So if we look at the recaptures, and we look at the movement data that we can derive from these recaptures, we see that only 20% of those fish actually are recaptured in a creek or a location other than they were initially tagged. 60% of those fish that move don't usually move more than 2 kilometers back and forth from neighboring creeks. So we see a really kind of highly connected system where bonefish show high fidelity to their particular flat or creek in which they were originally captured. Now, the reason it's important that we also do a lot of work in other areas of the island, coming all the way down the Exuma Sound and up the Atlantic side, is in almost 8 years of research, we've only seen 2 fish move out of this Rock Sound Bank side, and that was 2 fish that moved just to the closest creek on the south side. We've never had any bonefish move from the Exuma Sound side into the bank system either. So looking at growth, we can also see that the different habitats that we assess in the Rock Sound Bank system, here's the mean and the median size class here, very similarly sized fish. And using this data, we can also look at growth rates. So we can see that bonefish in the Rock Sound system grow in a mean of 7.3 millimeters a year, plus or minus 3 millimeters. So recently, we worked with some researchers out of Florida University to establish a population estimate or an abundance estimate for the Rock Sound Bank system. What we did is because we don't see any fish moving in or out based on our conventional mark recapture stuff research, we can kind of call the Rock Sound Banks a closed system. We can account for uneven sampling days because we really get out opportunistically depending on research needs, outreach needs, angler needs. And we can kind of bin these into sampling days and include sampling days as a covariate in the model. And then we can also bin these this uneven sampling by seasons to kind of compress uneven sampling into repeated sampling events. Using these, we could determine several population parameters. We can look at apparent survival as well as the probability of a fish being captured across subsequent sampling periods. And we can use these values together with the number of fish that we catch that are either marked or unmarked to determine population abundances for each season. So if we look at survival and capture probability, we see that our capture probability is pretty consistent across all seasons despite uneven sampling effort, and our apparent survival is about 0.43. Now what's really important is that this is our abundance estimate going across seasons starting in 2009 when the first tags went out. We don't have a population estimate because we have no subsequent sampling periods. And we can see kind of a mean bonefish abundance in the Rock Sound Bank system of 2,257 fish. Realistically, we're probably looking at a population between 2,200 and 3,000 fish based on the range that we see in these figures. So, to sum up the bonefish population metrics, we see growth based on our mark recapture studies of about 7.3 to plus or minus 3.2 millimeters a year. Now, this is corroborated by some of the otolith work that's been done by some of our collaborating researchers that says adult bonefish in the region demonstrate about 10 millimeters of growth a year. So this validates that the mark recapture does give good data, even considering user error and anglers taking measurements, does give good data on growth for this closed population. We can also look at movement and site fidelity, and this is kind of the site fidelity and the small movements depicted for bonefish outside of spawning migrations is also backed up by quite a bit of acoustic telemetry studies performed both on South Eleuthera and other islands. Our abundance estimates, although we had difficulties condensing our extended sampling periods into discrete sampling units, our estimates show that they're fairly solid estimates, are robust, and our probability of capture is quite consistent across seasons, which suggests good modeling. So, to sum up the mark recapture stuff, these conventional mark recapture methods provide a cost-effective model for kind of monitoring population metrics. So, what does it mean for management and continued management of bonefish populations in the Bahamas or elsewhere? The Bahamas has a long history of land use change that we're familiar with. For example, Rock Sound, the bank system outside of Rock Sound, we've seen 13% of our creeks have either been completely fragmented or have some level of habitat loss. Islands such as Andros, up to 80% of their creeks have been fragmented to some extent. Bahamas-wide, coastal development, illegal netting, and legal harvest of bonefish and fragmentation continue. So using this mark recapture model, we can kind of have a standardized tool for monitoring the current baseline, the new baseline that we have in the Bahamas for population metrics and population size. And we can use this to monitor and implement management strategies moving forward. I think an important thing to note here is that this management approach doesn't include just researchers and just policymakers. Students, guides, and anglers are a critical component to actually collecting this data. So it's a really cool model moving forward and something that should be useful for the Bahamas. With that, I will take any questions. Thanks.